My name is Karen. I am 60 years old. A retired pianist who once played for crowded halls, but now lives quietly in a small town on the outskirts of Paris. Music had been my life, my refuge, and my way of building a future. Yet in the last 3 years I turned that same devotion toward my family. I poured my savings, my energy, and my trust into supporting my son, Liam, and his wife, Elise. I wanted them to live well, to have opportunities one never had when I was their age. I paid the rent for their elegant apartment in the heart of the city, a place filled with light and modern comforts. I purchased designer furniture to make their home not just livable, but enviable. I even funded their expensive vacations, trips to sunny coasts and winter resorts where they could relax without worry. Piece by piece, my savings slipped away. In total, I spent over 40,000 euros. That sum was not casual money. It was everything I had carefully set aside through years of piano performances, and what remained of the inheritance from my late husband, Pierre, who passed away a decade ago. I gave freely, believing love would be returned. Instead, what I received was a sharp betrayal that pierced me to the core. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. It all began on a rainy October afternoon, when the sky above Paris was the color of bruised steel and the streets glistened with a melancholy sheen. I remember sitting by the window of my small living room, listening to the steady rhythm of rain tapping against the glass, when I dialed Liam's number. My heart carried a quiet joy, the kind that swells in a mother's chest when she imagines being part of her child's most important moments. I wanted to ask him about the wedding plans, about when and where, so I could prepare myself properly. I had already bought a silk dress in a shade of deep emerald blue, a dress that had cost me 300 euros. I had imagined wearing it proudly, standing by my son as he took his vows. But instead of the warmth I expected, I was met with Elise's face on the screen. She smiled, but it was not the kind of smile that welcomes. It was a polished, almost cold gesture, the sort of smile one gives when they are rehearsing cruelty. And then she spoke words that would shatter me. "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited the people who are truly close." For a moment, silence fell heavier than the rain outside. The words sank in slowly, like ice crawling into my veins. Truly close. I was not included. I, who had paid for Elise's wedding gown, a beautiful dress worth 1,200 euros. I, who had sent them 500 euros every month so they could maintain their luxurious lifestyle, who had carried them through every financial hurdle, was not considered close enough to stand at my own son's side. I stood in my living room, staring at the pale reflection of myself in the darkened window, and suddenly my house felt unfamiliar, almost foreign. The furniture around me seemed hollow, stripped of meaning. In my mind, I saw the Italian leather sofa I had purchased for them, sitting proudly in their apartment, an apartment whose rent I had covered for years, while I myself was excluded, unwelcome in their new life. The distance between us was no longer measured in kilometers but in love withheld. When Liam finally appeared on the call, his eyes dropped. He couldn't look at me. The same boy who once ran into my arms, who pressed his small hands against my cheeks and promised he would always love his mother, now stood with his head lowered, betraying his silence. That silence was louder than any insult Elise could have delivered. Later, I scrolled through social media and saw what I had been denied. The photographs gleamed with celebration. Elise's parents raising glasses of champagne, her siblings laughing in elegant attire, their faces bright with pride. And yet there was no trace of me. Not a single image suggested I even existed. My absence was glaring, like an erased line in a family portrait. I was invisible at my own son's wedding. Then came the cruelest twist of all. I discovered that Elise had used the 1,000 euros I had sent the previous month. Not for bills, not for necessities, but for the rings. Rings that would never be shown to me, symbols of a union that excluded me entirely. I had unknowingly financed the very celebration from which I was deliberately shut out. The realization struck like thunder. and the sorrow that had been weighing on my chest transformed into something hotter, sharper. Anger. For years I had lived for Liam. I had sacrificed the final stretch of my career as a pianist so I could raise him without distraction. I turned down invitations to tour across Europe, passing on stages I had long dreamed of, because I believed in giving my son stability and a secure future. I put away money, quietly and diligently, so he would never have to struggle as I once did. And now to stand in the silence of my home, drenched in betrayal, was almost unbearable. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every euro I had earned through discipline and loss, suddenly it all felt mocked. The rain outside blurred the world into gray, but the truth stood clear before me. I had given everything, and in return I was cast aside. My son had chosen to let me fade into the margins of his life, as though the woman who gave him everything was no longer worthy of standing in the light of his joy. The pain settled deep, but beneath it, anger grew stronger. For the first time I asked myself a question I had never dared to consider. Had I loved my son too much? Or had I mistaken my sacrifices for bonds that no longer existed? That day, with the sound of rain beating steadily against the windows, I understood that my life, once built on music then rebuilt on devotion, had been used, drained, and abandoned. And for the first time in many years I did not feel like a mother. I felt like a stranger. Now I understand. In their eyes I was nothing more than a cash machine. My love, my sacrifices, my years of careful saving had been reduced to numbers in a bank account. A week after their secret wedding, the phone rang. Elise's voice, trembling but calculated, came through the receiver. She begged for money, claiming they were 2 months behind on rent, 1,400 euros in arrears. Her words struck me like déjà vu. The same tired melody I had heard too many times before. "Karen, you forgot to send the money," she said. Her tone was sharp, almost scolding, as though I were a negligent bank clerk who had failed to process a routine transfer. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. My voice came out calm, far calmer than I expected. "Elise," I said softly, "I only help the people who are truly close." Silence. For the first time, the words she had once thrown at me returned with precision, slicing through her entitlement. I heard her breath catch, the panic rising in her throat. There was no clever response, no rehearsed sweetness to shield her. Just silence. But silence was never enough to hold them back. After that call, everything escalated quickly, as though they could sense the walls of their financial kingdom crumbling. One morning, while I was seated at my old upright piano, coaxing the tender notes of Chopin's Nocturne into the rain-washed air, a pounding at the door jolted me out of my reverie. The sound was urgent, insistent. I froze for a moment, my hands hovering above the keys. Through the lace curtain I saw them, Liam and Elise, and beside them a stranger in a gray suit, polished and imposing. Before I could react, the door opened. They had used a key, the spare I had once entrusted to them with the belief they would look after me in times of need, as I had looked after them. My trust had been weaponized. They walked in as if they owned the place. Elise clutched Liam's arm tightly, her lips stretched into a smile too rehearsed to be sincere. The stranger, the man in the suit, moved swiftly toward my dining table, where a stack of unopened mail and neatly kept documents lay. He began rifling through them with a clinical detachment, as though my life's history was merely paperwork to be dissected. Bank statements, utility bills, even my will. Nothing escaped his probing fingers. "Madam Karen," he said finally, with the polished cadence of a man too used to deceit, "you appear to be facing some difficulties. Liam and Elise are deeply concerned about your mental health. They've asked me to assist you in managing your estate." My breath caught in my chest. Estate. Mental health. Words that disguised their hunger for control. They weren't just asking for money anymore. They wanted ownership of me, of everything I had left. I looked at Liam, waiting, hoping for a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a glimmer of the boy who once ran barefoot through our garden, his laughter filling the air like sunlight. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on the floor, his silence complicit, his loyalty sold for comfort. Elise reached out, her fingers brushing against my hand in a gesture of feigned tenderness. "Karen," she said softly, too softly, "we only want what's best for you. At your age, it's natural to become confused. It happens to everyone." The word struck like a blow. Confused. As if my mind, the same mind that had memorized and performed Rachmaninoff, Chopin, Debussy, was faltering. As if decades of discipline, of concerts where every note had to fall with precision, had dissolved into frailty. I, who had managed finances alone for years after Pierre's passing, who had survived grief and rebuilt myself note by note, was now being told I was unfit. I rose from the piano bench, my hands trembling not with fear, but with the force of the anger boiling within me. My voice shook, each syllable laced with fury. "Out," I said, pointing to the door. "All of you. Out of my house." The words echoed against the walls of my modest living room, louder than the storm outside. Elise's face hardened, her mask slipping into something sharp and venomous. Liam's shoulders tensed, but he still refused to meet my eyes. The suited man, Du Bois, I would later learn, merely smirked, as though my protest were a minor inconvenience in his practiced routine of exploitation. But in that moment I did not care. My anger burned brighter than their schemes. They had mistaken kindness for weakness, generosity for surrender. They had forgotten that I was not just a woman with savings to plunder, but an artist, a mother, a widow who had endured far more than they could imagine. The rain outside lashed harder against the windows, and the nocturne I had abandoned still lingered faintly in the air, its unfinished melody a reflection of the confrontation that now unfolded. For years I had been their lifeline, the invisible foundation of their comfort. But as I stood there, pointing to the door with fire in my chest, I realized the truth. The lifeline was cut. Du Bois gathered the papers he had scattered across my table, his smirk fading into a thin line of irritation. Elise dropped her hand, her eyes narrowing, the sweetness gone. Liam finally looked up, just for a second, and in that fleeting glance I saw a mixture of shame and defiance battling in his expression. "Go," I repeated louder this time. My voice cracked, but not from weakness. From rage. From the years of silence I had swallowed. From the betrayal that had carved itself into my bones. They hesitated, but I did not waver. My arm remained outstretched, my finger pointing like an arrow toward the door. Finally, Du Bois led the way, muttering something under his breath in French that I chose not to catch. Elise followed, her heels striking the wooden floor with an anger she could not disguise. Liam lingered for a moment, his eyes searching mine as though for forgiveness. But I had none left to give. When the door closed behind them, the house fell silent. Only the rain remained, tapping its endless rhythm. I sank back onto the piano bench, my body trembling with exhaustion. My fingers found the keys once more, almost instinctively, and the notes of Chopin returned. This time, though, they did not sound like sorrow. They sounded like defiance. For the first time I felt the shift inside me, the turning of grief into steel. They had tried to strip me of dignity, of independence, of the very mind that had carried me through 60 years. But as the melody filled the air again, I knew I had reclaimed something they could never take, my strength. They did not stop. Their persistence was relentless, as though my refusal had only ignited a greater determination to break me down. 1 week later, I opened the door to find a woman standing on my porch in a beige coat, holding a clipboard. She introduced herself as Madame Moreau, a social worker sent to evaluate my well-being. My chest tightened when she explained the purpose of her visit. Someone had reported that I was behaving abnormally. According to her file, I had installed security cameras because of paranoia, and I had cut off communication with my family because I was under manipulation. Each word felt like a knife, carefully planted to paint me as unstable. I could almost hear Elise's voice behind those accusations, twisting reality until kindness looked like cruelty, and self-preservation looked like madness. I did not panic. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Laurent, my lawyer, a man I had trusted for years, ever since he had guided me through Pierre's will after his passing. He arrived within the hour, rain still clinging to his coat, a folder thick with documents under his arm. His presence filled me with a strength I had nearly forgotten I possessed. Laurent laid the papers neatly on the dining table. He presented receipts, transfers, and bank statements showing more than 40,000 euros I had given Liam and Elise over the past 3 years. He placed beside them a recent medical report signed by my physician, confirming that I was of sound mind, my faculties intact, my health steady for a woman of my age. Moreau reviewed the documents in silence, her brow furrowed as she turned page after page. At last, she set her pen down and looked at me with a softness that had been absent when she first entered. "Madam," she said quietly, "there is no basis for intervention here." She apologized and took her leave, the rain-soaked street swallowing her figure. But relief did not last long. I knew this was only the beginning, not the end. The true battle revealed itself days later, when I was served with court papers. Liam and Elise had filed a petition to have me declared legally incapacitated, demanding guardianship over my estate. The betrayal crystallized into something even darker. They wanted not only my money, but my name, my rights, my freedom. Their case was built on 3 so-called witnesses. First, Elise herself, whose testimony would no doubt drip with rehearsed concern and hidden venom. Second, my neighbor Monsieur Lefebvre, a bitter man who had always disapproved of me installing cameras on my property, muttering about how it spoiled the charm of the street. And third, the most shocking of all, Bernard, the local pharmacist, whose signature appeared on a false statement claiming I was hoarding and used medication. I refused to let their lies stand. I went to see Bernard in person. The small pharmacy smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender soap. Bernard stood behind the counter, his shoulders hunched, his face pale when he recognized me. He stammered before I even spoke. "Elise, she told me it was just a form for insurance," he confessed, shame coloring his voice. "She said it was routine, nothing important. I didn't realize what I was signing." His words came with the weight of guilt, and I saw in his eyes the regret of a man tricked into complicity. I leaned forward gently, not with anger, but with a quiet firmness. "Then you must correct it, Bernard. Write a statement of truth. Only then can you undo what has been done." He nodded quickly, almost eagerly, as if desperate for redemption. "Of course, Madam Karen. I will write it immediately. I never meant to harm you." When I left the pharmacy, holding his new written declaration in my hand, I felt both vindicated and weary. This was only one battle in a war that was far from over. Liam and Elise had underestimated me. They thought I was fragile, easy to silence. But they had forgotten who I was. A woman who had faced loss, loneliness, and sacrifice, and who had built her life back each time with nothing but discipline and strength. As I walked home under the gray Paris sky, the weight of their betrayal pressed heavily on me. But so did a new resolve. They had chosen the path of deceit. I would choose the path of truth. And in the courtroom, truth would be my instrument, sharper than any blade, louder than any piano I had ever played. During that dark season, when my own family had turned against me, I found unexpected comfort in new friendships. Claire, my neighbor, a 65-year-old widow with kind eyes and a gentle voice, became my anchor. She understood in ways others could not, because she too had once been betrayed by her own daughter, drained of savings she thought she was giving out of love. But unlike me, Claire had eventually learned to say one simple but powerful word: no. Her honesty became my lifeline. Over cups of tea, she spoke openly of the pain and the healing, of reclaiming her independence after years of silence. It was Claire who introduced me to a circle of remarkable women, each carrying scars that mirrored my own. They called themselves les femmes inflexibles, the Unyielding Women. The name alone made me straighten my back a little taller. Soon I became one of them. Each afternoon we gathered at a small cafe along the Seine, where the air smelled of roasted coffee beans and river mist. We sat around polished wooden tables, telling our stories, laughing at the absurdities of life, sometimes crying together when old wounds surfaced. But always at the end we reminded one another of the truth. We were worthy of love, not for the money we gave, not for the sacrifices we made, but simply because we existed. Those afternoons stitched together the torn fabric of my soul. In their company, I was no longer just a mother discarded, a widow forgotten. I was Karen, a woman with dignity, humor, and strength. The day of the trial arrived like a storm on the horizon. I prepared carefully, choosing a gray wool coat, elegant, understated, the kind that spoke of quiet confidence. As I buttoned it, I told myself this was not only about money or papers. It was about my freedom, my very right to stand in the world as myself. The courtroom was cold, the high ceilings echoing with whispers and footsteps. Liam and Elise sat across from me, their faces tight with determination. They had hired a sleek, expensive lawyer whose polished shoes clicked sharply against the floor. He stood before the judge and painted me as a frail, paranoid woman, manipulated by new friends who preyed on her vulnerability. But I was not alone. Laurent, steady as ever, rose with calm authority. He submitted reports from Dr. Fournier, a respected psychologist, whose evaluation described me as possessing a mind sharper than many people half my age. His words carried weight, not only in ink but in the conviction of truth. Then Claire took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but soon it grew steady as she described me. Independent, joyful, clear-minded. After her came two other women from Les Femmes Inflexibles, each echoing the same testimony. Their presence was powerful. Not merely witnesses, but proof that community heals what betrayal tries to destroy. When it was my turn, I stood tall. I spoke slowly, carefully, telling the story that had nearly broken me. How I had been excluded from my son's wedding despite funding it. How I had been treated as a mere wallet. How they had tried to strip me of dignity by calling me confused, unstable, unfit. My voice wavered at times, but I did not falter. I let the truth carry me. Each word a note in a symphony I had rehearsed through pain and resilience. Across the bench, Madame Dubois, the presiding judge, listened with a face carved of stone. She was a woman of stern features, her gaze unwavering, her silence both intimidating and reassuring. I felt as though she was weighing not only my words but my very spirit. After hours of arguments, testimonies, and documents passed from hand to hand, the courtroom fell into a hush. Madame Dubois withdrew to deliberate. The minutes stretched endlessly, my heart beat loud in my chest. Claire reached over, squeezing my hand, and I thought of Chopin's Nocturne, the music that had always carried me through storms. At last the judge returned. Her robe flowed behind her as she ascended to her seat. She looked at me, then at Liam and Elise, and began to read. Her words cut through the heavy silence like a bell. "Madame Karen," she declared, "you are fully competent. There is no evidence of incapacity. On the contrary, the petition brought against you appears motivated not by genuine concern, but by financial interest." The gavel struck once, final and clear. The case was dismissed. A wave of relief crashed over me. My knees nearly buckled, but I held myself upright. I had not only won the case, I had won back my freedom, my dignity, my name. Liam's face turned pale, Elise's lips tightened in fury, but I no longer needed their approval, their love, or their acknowledgement. The court had affirmed what I had always known deep within me. I was still here, whole, capable, strong. As we stepped out of the courthouse, the air smelled of rain again, but this time it felt cleansing. Claire and the women hugged me, their voices bright with celebration. Laurent smiled, his eyes reflecting quiet pride. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my chest. That day, I understood something profound. Sometimes family betrays us, but we can choose new families, built not from blood but from loyalty and truth. And sometimes, in the darkest battles, we discover that the strength we thought was lost has been waiting inside us all along. I had faced their lies and their greed, and I had emerged unbroken. After the trial, I moved into a small sunlit apartment not far from the Eiffel Tower. Each morning I awoke to the sound of church bells echoing through the narrow Parisian streets, a reminder that life, in all its fragility, still carried music for those willing to listen. My new home was modest compared to the grand apartment I once paid for Liam and Elise, but it was mine. Every corner reflected my choices, my independence, and my rediscovered joy. I decided to donate part of my assets to organizations that protect elderly people from financial abuse. I knew the pain of betrayal, the loneliness of realizing your generosity was mistaken for weakness, and I wanted to ensure others would have a shield I once lacked. With the rest, I gave myself permission to live the life I had postponed for decades. I enrolled in oil painting classes. My hands, once devoted to piano keys, now played with colors, experimenting with light and shadow. I traveled to Florence and stood awestruck before Michelangelo's works, feeling both small and infinite at the same time. And slowly I returned to music. Not on grand stages as I once had, but at small charity events, where each note carried not ambition but gratitude. Liam and Elise never reached out to me again. I heard through acquaintances that they had to move to a smaller apartment, and that Elise had finally taken up a job, a step she had resisted for years. Perhaps hardship would teach them what my generosity could not, the value of self-reliance. At 60, I finally learned truths I wished I had embraced sooner. I understood that love cannot be purchased, that respect must be mutual, and that freedom is the greatest gift one can give oneself. Sitting on my balcony at dusk, watching the Seine catch the last blush of the sunset, I was no longer the fearful mother desperate to hold on to her child. I was no longer the woman who gave until she was empty. I was Karen, an artist, a friend, a free woman. And for the first time in my life, I truly loved myself. From this journey, I drew 5 lessons I wish to share with you. Lessons carved out of pain but polished by resilience. Lesson 1. Generosity without boundaries becomes self-destruction. For years, I believed that giving endlessly to my son and daughter-in-law would strengthen our bond. Instead, it weakened me. Generosity is beautiful, but when it lacks boundaries, it turns into exploitation. Saying no is not cruelty, it is wisdom. Learn to give without erasing yourself. Protect your limits because no one else will. Lesson 2. Respect must be earned, not assumed. I assumed my sacrifices would naturally be met with gratitude and respect. Instead, I was dismissed, excluded, even mocked. The truth is, respect cannot be bought with money or secured by titles like mother or parent. It is earned through mutual care and recognition. If someone refuses to respect you, no amount of giving will change their heart. Lesson 3. Independence is the root of dignity. When Liam and Elise tried to seize control of my finances, they aimed to strip me of my independence. But independence is not simply about money. It is about choice, about having authority over your own life. Guard it fiercely. Whether you are 20 or 70, dignity begins with the right to decide for yourself. Lesson 4. Community can heal what family sometimes breaks. When my own family betrayed me, I found solace in the friendship of women who had walked similar paths. Claire and the Unbroken Women reminded me that family is not only the one we are born into, but also the one we build through kindness, empathy, and shared resilience. Seek out those who uplift you. They can restore the faith that betrayal tries to steal. Lesson 5. Loving yourself is not selfish, it is survival. For decades, I poured my love outward, leaving little for myself. It took 60 years, a courtroom battle, and profound solitude to realize that I too deserved love from me. Loving yourself means honoring your needs, cherishing your dreams, and refusing to live as a shadow in someone else's story. Self-love is not the end of love. It is the beginning. So here I am, living proof that it is never too late to reclaim your life. If my story resonates with you, if you too have ever felt drained by giving too much, or silenced by those who dismissed you, let it be a reminder. You are worthy of respect, of freedom, of love that does not demand you vanish in the process. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If these words touched you, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe, so that together, we can keep building a community where no voice, no matter the age, is ever silenced.